So let's get to our first section around this, and we're talking about, first of all, that move from reactive to predictive delivery aspect. So we're going to bring out some real life examples. So Luke, from your perspective, so how does forecasting demand, delays or disruption change decision making at an operational level in this context?
So I think a lot of that changes at an operational level when you're moving from being, purely reactive and then you're looking at a spreadsheet. I've seen that often enough, over the last 7 or 8 years, and it's literally guesswork. It's in Michael's head, it was in my head, and we think it's going in the right direction, and we'll make a bet on that. But at that point, it's complete, uncertainty. Do you want to remodel your network, or you sign a big customer? You don't know if you can take that. You don't know if you've got that capacity in your supply chain, in your network to do that, and it's pure guesswork. I've seen it often enough when we have clients that struggle to understand that initially. They just see a spreadsheet full of data and they don't know where to go. And it's a bet, it's a hunch that we think we're going to get it right. And the problem is, at the time you then implement that, and then you look at it in 6 to 12 months, it might be too late. Your supply chain might be falling apart, you have no capacity, you're disappointing your customers. And in this day and age, where we expect everything in real time, the parcel world is driving a lot of that in terms of the behaviours, you can't afford for a guest to then not work out in the next 6 to 12 months. It will ruin your reputation. Could close your business down ultimately if you get it wrong.
From the network perspective, what have you seen in terms of that capability to remodel a network on a basis that you're not pushing 10 people into a darkened room for 3 months?
Yeah, so I think that's moved on immensely when people understand the power of the data that they've got at their fingertips. You have lots of people that will sit there, as you say, 10 people in a darkened room. It does still happen, and they'll come out with ideas. But you can reverse it out with the use of AI to then, make it more predictive. So you've got to blend various things. It can't purely be just data. You've got to put, the contextual scenarios on it. It's not just you put in data and then it comes back out. You've got to build the ecosystem around it. But then you can let the AI do the heavy lifting. You can run different scenarios that would take you 3 months to do it all, but you can do it in hours or days, and run different scenarios based on what you expect to see. So you could be expecting, your growth aspirations is you want it 10x in the next 2 years. What does that mean for your supply chain? And how do we get there? And then you can use the harnessing of AI to do that network model to go, right, well, we need to be here in 12 months, 24 months, we need to be there. If we want to do that, or if we want to pare it back, change the variables, let the AI do the work, and then come up with it. And then you've done the predictive element, so the guesswork is removed, and then you can be more confident in what you want to deploy. In terms of network changes, whether that's move a depot, we have conversations with customers all the time about this. We want to move the volume from there. We're low volume in the north of Scotland. You can tell from my accent, I'm from that direction. Because we just don't have the volume, it's costing us a lot of money. Can a depot further south absorb that? And we still serve all the customer base, but we don't know. At that point, can we do it? And then we bring in the AI. We've done it a few times as a consultancy piece to model it. We go, right, give us the order data. We'll take that depot out, or we'll change it. We'll put 2 vans in instead of 30. What does that mean? Can you still fulfill it? Are you now short? Does it cause an issue elsewhere? Because you might be focusing on one regional area, but the impact that can have on your overall network is huge because it's all intertwined. It's not make one change there and everything works. There's bound to be a knock-on effect somewhere else, and you need to be able to understand that without 6 months later realising, oh, we've not got enough capacity anymore in London, for example.
We talked about moving away from spreadsheets. But in terms of that planner who's got a wealth of experience, was entrusted in making that decision for the business or helping the decision activity take place, what are they seeing? Are they sat in front of a screen? How does that manifest itself in a way that makes it malleable?
Yeah, so generally some good examples we will always, when we're doing sort of a prospecting or I have conversations with current clients often enough, they want a modelling environment, as they would call it, for their planners, where they can plug in a data set, then change things and move all of that around so that they can model the network. They want to do that at their fingertips, because previously that might have been a spreadsheet that then leads into formulas and whatnot, and there's a lot of manual work, whereas they can get a replica of their production environment, so all their vehicles, all their config, and then start changing variables at the click of a button. It's quite daunting at first, so I spend a lot of time trying to sort of identify champions in the business to get them to use the capabilities of the platform because they get scared. It's human nature. You've done it in a certain way for a long time and you don't want to change that. But then when you start showing them the value of, well, something that you would take months to do and could be quite stressful, you might be working 12-hour days, 7 days a week. So if you follow these regimented steps, you can do this in a matter of hours and then do it over and over and over to whatever portfolio you want to make it look like.
Yeah. I mean, what I saw working for this tiny little French company was effectively they would be able to take 2 years' data, which is a huge amount when you're talking about a network that's got maybe 100 million touch points in a year. So there's 200 million touch points, there's 7 major tracks, you're into the billions already. What they'll then do is run 10,000 scenarios over that element, which no human will be capable of doing in 100 lifetimes more than anything else. So from that people perspective, there's probably resistance to a degree around the people who have become so entrusted by the business. But what's it doing to them that actually, how do you sell it to those people who are looking at a job loss straight in the face sometimes?
Yeah, so that's the most challenging piece. I think it's the same in any product uptake. It's sort of showing it to them that it's not replacing them. I think that's what a lot of people fear when they see change. Oh, I'm going to be out of a job. What it ultimately does is it gives them a new tool set. It will help grow their career. There's times where we've spoken to people and they go, we didn't think about it like that, or no, we could even do this, or we didn't know how to achieve it. And then they also learn, and then they come back and we get positive reviews and go, we've really enjoyed using it. It's simple. We can make a change, understand it, and if it's wrong, I haven't brought the whole network down. I've heard those stories of we made one change and then the whole thing's fallen over. But then you go, right, we can just scenario model, whenever we want. So if the business throws a demand at us, I'm not going to scale up a team to do modelling for 3 months. I can say, right, give me this data, I'll go away, we'll do it. If you don't like it, right, we'll change it. And it's that flexibility that they then get. Their job becomes 10 times easier and allows them to grow as individuals as well, because they're seeing a different planning element, and we always take them on the journey of talking about how it works, give them that understanding of what it does, so that if they start to see issues and they need our help, then it's absolutely fine, but they can also solve things on the hoof themselves and go, right, we don't think that looks right, or we don't need to speak to Luke and his team, we can just change it and then see what the output is. So it gives far more freedom and not constrained to a spreadsheet, a calculator, ultimately.
And I can guarantee that at least 50% of this room, if you're working in logistics, if you've taken on a new customer, that's incredibly exciting, but it's pretty scary if you haven't got the right customer. So in that respect, does the modelling enable that to say, is this the right customer?
Yeah, so that definitely helps. Yeah, that's always the classic one. I've seen it often enough. We've taken on a new client, or we know we're about to sign this new client, and 9 times out of 10 you see the transport planner looking and like, do we have enough slack in the network to pick that up? That's what I've seen often enough, and it's been able to prove that. That very question: how do we know we can afford to take that client on? Is the demand realistic? Can we scale the network? Have we already got the capacity there? If it's not there, what do we need to do and where? And they get that safety net of being able to try and model it. Provided the client, it's always a challenge. If the customer can give you a data set that you can then use to simulate, that is sort of the golden goose, so to speak. And we do that quite a lot, but it's often getting the client to give us that data, because people don't realise you've got the data, but they don't understand how to interpret it, so they actually go, no, we don't. And then we sit down, we'll do some consultancy with them and go, you've got this data point, this one, you merge it, that gives us exactly what we need to allow your planning team to do the simulation layer.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. It's the volume of data I think scares people, because we're not all data analysts, we're not specialists. That's where you rely on the tooling to help you.
Yeah. And in terms of, you talk about the data, and I mentioned it, that we have that data there. You've seen the industry, if you're working in not the sharpest end, but the end point, the actual delivery operation, and effectively, we've known for years how to build on a TMS and build a layer on top of that, part of that. It's quite an abrupt question, but why are we still in a situation where delivery operations are not able to predict a failure in that environment? What's the difference that this brings, potentially?
I mean, the differences it brings, I think, as we sort of mentioned and made reference to, is it moves you away from guesswork, to more predictability and stability in your network. But the challenge ultimately is in, you know, a lot of us in this room have probably been in the industry a long time. You know, in the last, you know, 7 or 8 years since I've been involved, you know, it's exploded. COVID completely changed the world, you know, so businesses don't necessarily have as much time as they did previously to try and make changes. They're under a lot of pressure, and it's so intrinsically linked from start to finish. You know, it could start with a container, you know, being loaded on a ship in China, all the way through to, you know, the end product, you know, a golf club set or whatever, getting delivered to my house. Each of those sections, if the capacity and the volume isn't right, can break down, and it's so intrinsically linked. The room for error is minimal, and the impact is huge. And you know, a lot of companies, you know, moving to that data-led approach, it requires a different psyche, you know, different skill set, and ultimately, you know, it's an expensive one to hire. You know, if you want to have a dedicated team to run a tool like this or do your own version of it, it's a big investment, and it's whether you can justify that investment on your own or partner up with somebody like Satalia to allow you to do it.
Yeah, and in terms of that we talk about predictive shipping, and in terms of, so how would you say, what exactly is being predicted, and how far ahead, what's your horizon?
So I think in terms of horizon, it really depends on, you know, your service offering to your customers. You know, we've got customers that just work on the next 7 days. We've got customers, depending on the goods they ship, they've got a lead time that could be up to 70 days. You know, so 3.5 months. And then you throw in, you know, Christmas peak. We'll also just come into that. You know, some retailers will release slots in, you know, September and things like that. And it's about being able to try and predict, have we got, you know, sufficient capability, capacity in the network throughout, you know, that 70-day horizon is a good one to work with, because I have conversations often of currently at the end of that 70-day horizon, how do you actually know if 3 trucks in, you know, the northeast of England is right? And 9 times out of 10 at the moment, when I speak to the customers, they go, it's just guesswork. We do it just to open up the slot horizon so that I can try and book a delivery. And then we don't actually look at it until we get to sort of 3 or 4 weeks out, because then like we've got a more accurate representation of, you know, the volume and the capacity utilisation. But that's then currently running on guesswork. And then we're talking about, right, you've got the data, we've got a scenario that we could use, let's try and model it and then start changing things so that you can be more predictive and get smarter. Because the last thing you want is if you know, don't release enough capacity in say 70 days, and the good that you've got on order isn't going to be until, you know, the end of that horizon, you're potentially going to lose business because you've not released enough capacity in the network.
But the and what I saw with Cardinal was a company doing field services, had the capability to grow, but just did not have the confidence to add those slots. Because effectively, whenever you add capacity, unless you're optimizing through efficiency, you're investing. And that investment, so I know when we spoke previously, you were talking about a particular client where you'd added those slots. And what was the process that you went through, the confidence you gave them?
So the confidence, that client, for example, when we first worked with them, it was before I joined the business, but we still work with them, and I've spoken to them so I understand exactly what's going on. When our team first went into them about 10, 12 years ago now, their route planning and their scheduling optimisation was transport planner in each depot that covers a relevant area in the UK, sitting there with an AA road atlas. I don't know if people remember what they are nowadays with Satalia and things like that. And they would plan the routes based on a spreadsheet, and it was just, you know, knowledge in the head. And that's a huge, huge overhead. You know, if I get hit by a bus and I'm one of those transport planners, that disappears. So we mapped out, you know, the entire business process, tried to understand what was going on, and then we built out the final mile delivery and route optimisation solution that we've got for them, which not only allowed them to grow, so in terms of, you know, the mileage that their vehicles were covering before we got involved, we then took 20% off of that. So we reduced it by 20% in terms of miles covered for the same order set and allowed them to grow. We opened up a brand new revenue channel for them. As part of this, it became a sales proposition that they could sell, and we helped increase their NPS by 8% as part of putting in this automated solution. And it enhanced their slot offering. So previously it used to be, you know, a lot of you probably remember these bigger goods like fridge freezers and furniture and things. It used to be, Michael will be there with his van at some point during the day. You know, you've got a horizon from 9 AM till 6 PM, but we've helped them move to more targeted, so it's not down to like the parcel world of an hour, but they're getting to smaller slot offerings, you know, so it could be a 2 or 3 hour window, and we're giving more accuracy, which is what then in turn helped with their NPS, because customers are getting greater accuracy. I don't have to sit around all day, it's happened often enough, and then you get the phone call, we're going to phone you half an hour out, you're sitting there, you know, 5 PM at night, like it's not here yet, when's it coming? but now they're getting greater accuracy, which has helped increase their sales as well, because they're getting a better offering. The end consumer is getting a far better service, which is very competitive in this world.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting point. Now, I think anyone in the UK, DPD were the first to come to market with a prediction, their DPD Predict product, and it would give you that 1 hour slot. In some cases it's down to half an hour or so. What I saw recently was a German-based route optimization company, and this is the level of capability, but also the human behaviour. What they're doing now is they are talking to the recipient and narrowing that from an hour to 45 minutes to half an hour to 15 minutes. Now you think that might be obtrusive, but really you just want that thing done and done properly.
Yep.
And what they saw is the level of engagement actually went up, whereas a lot of people might have switched off. And their delivery performance went from about 98%, which is reasonable, to 99.5%. And it's that ability to communicate with the end user, and that predictability that was working really well. And in terms of that, the probabilities of logistics is a complicated business. You cannot say that you're going to have a perfect network. It's just
impossible.
It's almost impossible. But how would you say that's adapted and changed in terms of people having confidence levels in their predictions? And how's that mindset altered through being able to use this kind of optimization?
Yeah, I think that mindset is changing immensely. From, as I say, it's tacit knowledge, it's in people's heads. I have this debate quite a lot with route planners, that have been in the job for 30 years. They watch our solution and they go, well, we could come up with a better route, watch this in the head. Well, the challenge, what the optimization engine comes up with. And then we have to have the conversation, but you're forgetting your knowledge is focused on a certain path, whereas the optimization engine is then taking into account lots of parameters. So it's coming up with a more optimal solution. And I think a lot of people think there's different ways to do the optimization. It might just be take all the orders in, you get to a certain point, and then you do the optimization, and it stops. From that perspective, but the way we work with it is it's constantly running throughout the day, so we're continually trying to find the most optimal solution. If Michael's order gets cancelled or he changes it to another day, we'll continue re-optimising up to the point that we go, right, we're not taking any more orders for tomorrow, we're going to lock it off. Would you think a transport planner couldn't do that constantly throughout the day? If you get an order feed throughout the day, you just couldn't. Whereas we give that flexibility, you'll get the response in real time, you can sit and watch it change on the screen and you understand, right, we're now going here, this is impacted on it. Or for example, the M25 shut, God forbid that happens, everything would probably fall apart. All of these things can impact. And if you leverage that predictive element and just the AI software in general, it allows you to be on the front foot from that perspective. You can be in front of the curve instead of figuring out, well, the M25 shut for the next 6 months, now I need to remodel everything. We can get that done in minutes in the background without the need for you to do any manual intervention, and then you get the output and you can choose to use it if you want. Or, people still want the ability, it's the safety blanket, we want to override it, we want to change things. We usually advise don't, trust the solution, but the users do still have that comfort blanket, they can move things if they want. They can override it. We generally advise let the optimization engine do the work, and that should be, your last resort, or if, a catastrophic network event happens that you just need to change something on the hop and you can't wait, you've got that ability. But the more you intervene, the less optimised the solution is going to be. You're almost damaging it. It's human nature, we want to tweak things, we play with things, it's just the way it is. But that will damage the output. So you've just got to give it that trust and only ever intervene in exceptional circumstances.
I'll flip that on its head and say anyone who's worked in, we're lucky in this industry that people tend to love the industry, stay in it, and they become experts in their particular area, whether they're working in a warehouse, whether they're out on the road driving, whatever it might be. But how do you, from what you've said, it could be easily interpreted, well, the machine does everything, I can just go home now. But how does the human experience element become a part of this process? Yeah, it's still a critical part of the process. It's not, a black box. Some people who think of certain things when you hear certain concepts. It still requires, that guiding hand, the users keeping an eye on it. Monitoring it throughout the day. You might be running shifts at different times of the day, dispatching trucks at 6 in the morning and then 12 in the afternoon. It's not a case of just leave it and everything works. You've got to keep an eye on it. You might need to make changes, or there might be an issue. You need to take a van off the road. Right, what do I do? You've got to change some of the parameters, change the config.
that feeds the machine to then allow that to do the re-optimization. So it's still hands-on. You just aren't as ingrained, and it's not as taxing mentally on you because you've got the data, you've got the control at your fingertips. You've not got to then go, right, Luke's van had 60 orders on it, and I now need to figure out if Michael's and Bob's has the capacity to take that. You can change the parameter, and then the platform or the technology will give you the answer. And if it still can't give you the answer, you'll then know, right, we need to add more in, or we're going to, worst case scenario, disappoint customers because we're going to have to rearrange the delivery. But you can do that in minutes rather than having to lock people in a room in an emergency situation and go, right, we've lost 6 trucks or a depot's gone offline today. How do we reallocate the fleet? You can just change some of the parameters and then let the data and the machine do the work.
If you think about a normal day, I mean, you talk there about the scenarios that everyone experiences but nobody wants, and they are thankfully infrequent. But if you think a day where effectively the sun's shining, the routes are on the road, or the picking process is working well, what does this enable a leader to do within the organisation to be able to do?
Yeah, so in terms of what it enables, the leaders to do, they can be more forward-looking. You're moving away from, reactivity, living in the moment, living in the current day. Depends on your proposition, where you're working, but you can start to look further ahead. Make sure you've got capacity, where available. Start to think about things like Christmas peak, for example. We've also just come out the back of that. We worked with 2 big retailers for Christmas peak last year, and we started the discussions to help them, because it was the first year they were with us on the platform. We were sort of helping them plan what that network looked like back in the summer, because they hadn't done it before from that perspective, and trying to make it more predictive. But then they saw the value, we can actually do this a little bit closer to the time. And previously it was pure guesswork. We think we're just going to need to bring in X number of external couriers to complement our existing fleet to drive that, and it enhances the strength of your customer service proposition, because you can be monitoring stuff 7 days in advance, and we'll know today if there's a problem this time next week, and we can deal with it now. Whereas previously it was just the nature of as technology was emerging, you might not actually know you've got the problem until I phone up and say, oh, where's my order? And then you find out Michael's van's broken down. By that point, it's too late. It moves you to the point that you can be managing on a far longer horizon, which helps to obviously strengthen your business proposition and then generate extra sales.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about, but these are the benefits. I mean, I'm something of an evangelist in this area, having worked in it, implemented stuff badly, implemented stuff successfully. So I don't need convincing, but in terms of what would you say would be the misconceptions amongst leaders? I mean, the people who are impacted by this, it's got to be sold to them, they need champions within that environment, but as a leader looking to make this investment, this isn't nascent, but it's emerging. What are the misconceptions about this approach?
So I think one of the biggest misconceptions that leaders or anybody in general can have is they go, we've got all this data, we've got a mountain of data, we can show you all these analytics, these performance metrics, right? So we've got that, we've got the last year, 2 years, whatever, in terms of our shipping data. We understand exactly what's going on in our network in the last 12 months, and they think because they've got that, they can predict the future. And this is the biggest discussion I have quite often. They go, right, I'll give you this data. You can tell me exactly what's going to happen for the next 2.5 years based on what I've got there. I've got the past. And that's the biggest misconception. You can't. You can't purely predict the future based on what happened in the past. Because what also happened in the past is there was a series of factors, scenarios, supply chain breakdown, different things might happen. Yeah. And in order to get rid of that misconception, you've got to blend the two. So having the data is a great starting point. It's where most businesses are. But they forget that situational and context awareness is also there. So when you try to move away from that reactive model to being predictive, that's what makes it a success. You have to blend the two. You've got to have the order data set there, but then you also need to have the scenarios and the context that impacted on that to then predict what's going to go on in the future. You can't just go, we did, in March last year, we did 6,000 orders. In July, we did 20,000, so we think next year we're going to be there. Because there's a series of events and things that led to that, and you've got to blend the two to then allow the predictive element to predict what the future's going to look like. If you don't have the two, you're not going to predict with any degree of certainty. It's just going to probably be guesswork based on what you think happened, and you've probably forgotten half of it from last year.
Yeah, and I think, again, from experience, that these models can run, as I said earlier, 10,000 scenarios on that data, but the ability to be able to put in, okay, what if this happens? What if I take that customer out and put this customer in? What if my volume grows by 5%? What if my volume declines by 3%? And that would normally have taken a finance team or a planning team without these tools months.
Yeah.
And this is taking, my experience is it's a couple of hours in some
Yeah.
cases.
A couple of hours, if you've got the data and you've got the different scenarios like that, I take a new customer on, we close half our depots, half of our fleet's up for renewal, we're going to have a cascade of vehicles and things like that. You plug all that in, you can be doing this in hours. And the permutations, if there's any mathematicians in the room, in terms of the routing permutations and things, is in the millions or the hundreds of millions of all the options, and we can't compute that in our heads. That's just impossible. But this goes to being minutes, depending on the size of the data set, to hours, but you can run a full sort of portfolio change in days, when you would lock a team in a war room for months, drawing stuff on whiteboards, trying to do calculations. So it enables you to be far more predictive, far more nimble. So you could, if you get your ideal customer, what you want, but you don't know the answer. Previously you might go through a 6-month RFP exercise to try and prove that you can absorb that demand. Now you can be confident, as you can be, within a matter of days, if you harness the true power.
Yeah. So I'm an evangelist. You're working in this industry. You're successful in it. But in terms of the trust that's required to make this investment, first of all,
yep.
So there's a business case. That's a process. But in terms of then trusting the actual outputs of that, how do you get across that line?
Yeah.
People who are this is something that's new to them, they've not had the experience. What's going to get them across the line and thinking, yeah, I can trust it?
Yeah, so that's the biggest challenge. That happens quite often. Is one of the first things transport planners will normally say to me when I go into a room in part of the discovery stage, when we're signing up to a contract with a new client, and they go, well, how can you guarantee it's going to be better? It always happens. And it can be, through a series of things, we do a lot of work. We can do a simulation, if we need to present value, a lot of clients, we've got good solutions at this point, but they want better. We have to be able to quantify, right, we can move you from there to there. It's a 10% reduction in your fleet mileage and things like that, or 20% reduction in idle time. We've got to try and back it up. So often we'll end up running a simulation as a customer would on their behalf to go, well, here's what you gave us. And then we'll run it alongside, they've already got the data set, so we'll give us the last 6 months, give us the last year, you've got how your network performed, give us that data set, let us simulate it, make some changes to it using our algorithms, and then we can show you exactly how we can improve it before we even get to the point of launching it. Because the last thing you want is to launch the product and have people that are still unsure about it, because that's just going to take, the uptake and the trust in it is going to take a while. So we try to get that trust built before we even get to the point of implementing it. We go, you can use it, here's what it looks like, we can run simulations if you want to change things, if you want to do a network model exercise before we even build the solution out for you, we can do that. And we start to build that trust. We allow them to ask questions. We've got lots of specialists in the various elements that feed into the whole solution, and they can talk to any of them, and we can then tell them, well, this is why it does it like that, what do you think of this, and buy in. It's not a case of, here you go, here's the product off the shelf, away you go. We like to build that trust with them, because that's what's key to being successful for any organisation. It's a huge investment. You're potentially changing something that you've had for years. You might be replacing a current provider, or you're moving, as I say, from a road atlas in a spreadsheet. It's a huge jump, it's a big investment, and companies need to know it's right, because it's not cheap.
And in terms of that transition from, concept, desktop modelling, in terms of piloting that capability, again, my experience is before, when you had these layered ERP systems that were having outputs, my experience is now you're in a position to effectively go off grid and be able to do these activities in isolation. And is that a realistic scenario to say you've got multiple locations that you could take one away from its current incumbent?
Yeah, so that's a very realistic scenario. Happens quite a lot. It's generally the approach we talk about with our clients. If you're running a network of say 50 depot locations across the UK, and you want to just understand how the system's going to work, you don't want to change everything. So we'll say, you can either do dual running, so don't take us off, don't go off your current platform, but send us the exact same data feed. You can then make a choice. Do you want to send it for one depot, and then you can sit the two side by side and see exactly what's going on, or do you want to send us, the location data and everything for the 50 locations, and then we can run parallel, so you still have your incumbent as your master, where you start stress testing your new solution and make sure you get it right, and then the customer can then make the decision when they want to jump across. And that's becoming a more popular option. Whereas previously a software change would probably be a phase rollout or big bang. We'll just launch everything at once, and then it will be 6 months later, as I mentioned before, where you'll find out it didn't work. Whereas we can go, right, well, you can do it this way if you want. We leave it up to them. It just depends on how aggressive they want to be with their timelines. But that's becoming more prevalent. All right, can we move one? And generally they'll move a small depot first, because then they can prove it's working, and then they'll start to ramp it up and put the higher traffic through. We've got some customers who are quite happy just to send all the data and do the dual run so they can compare side by side. And we go, well, here's where you were, here's what we got in the simulation that we did for you, and here's the actual output based on the same data set. You start to prove it that way.
Would you call that a digital twin?
In essence, yeah. A digital twin from that perspective. You've got to make sure that we get, so we're always talking about making sure we get the exact same data set, so the same set of orders goes to our platform, and the same set of orders goes to the incumbent platform. If you want to be able to draw that comparison, you've got to be able to compare apples with apples. So it's not like, say, right, throttle it and give Satalia 20% of the volume. You've got to give us it all so that we can put the two side by side, so that you've got a fair comparison.
And how are people using that in terms of their perceptions? Beyond just, as you talked about, okay, let's prove the concept. What does that then open up from the perspective of insight into the business?
It opens up quite a lot because they get, a new insight, and they go, our incumbent platform or our incumbent process we thought was actually quite efficient, but then we've turned on the new solution for, this depot that's small volume, 6 vans, for example. And then suddenly we've seen, our miles covered, has reduced by 30%, or the time taken, the shift time is reduced by X numbers, or our fleet utilisation, so our van fill has increased, to near 90%. We're getting the best out of our vehicles, and they're seeing that, and then it starts to trigger process questions. So we've seen when we've done the dual run with clients, they've already then started trying to plan network changes and using their modelling environment or the lower environments they have on our system to make changes based on just seeing one depot and seeing the change in the network. So it allows them to start thinking, oh well, can I make changes now with confidence because I've actually seen it live in practice, albeit small scale. But then they start thinking, and then they look at processes. We've seen some clients change their operational process and actually go, we don't need to open this many shifts or this many vehicles, because in actual fact we can cut 3 of those vehicles and still give the same slot proposition to the same number of customers.
We talked about people, we talked a lot about data, the connection between those two, because some people, not me, get very excited about having tons and tons of data. But to me that doesn't seem like the right place to start in terms of that. I mean, we talked about
we spoke about this,
in terms of, well, how do you actually approach this challenge? You want to optimise, you want to get on the AI train, but what's the mindset? The key mindset.
So I think it's human nature. We think we've got lots of data. We see all these emerging and up and coming, data analysis tools, and people get excited. Think, right, let's do it. It's a conversation I have quite often. I used to be a data developer many years ago, so from that perspective. But that's where the mindset's wrong. You think you've got everything at your fingertips, but you really don't, because at that point you don't know what problem you're trying to solve. You've just got data, you've got some emerging technology you want to try out. You don't know what you're looking to solve. So the mindset shift is you've got to flip it on its head. I know it might sound a little bit alien, but you've got to think, what problem am I looking to solve? So the best example that we've used it a few times today is, I'm looking to potentially close 2 depots or reduce the capacity in 2 depots because we've got a driver strike or something like that. That's your problem, and then you look at, right, have I got the underlying data to understand, have we got a problem, what do we need to change? To do that, whereas too often people approach it from the other way around. So you look at the data and then you go, right, we think we've potentially got a problem here, but you need to be clear at the top, this is what we want to solve. And then we worry about tooling, data, people, everything to solve it. And that's a big mindset shift. Because everybody gets excited, we've got data, let's do it. It's the big thing, let's throw it into AI. Because you just need to understand the problem first to allow the true power of AI to come to the fore.
And I think, again, what I've seen is if you approach it from a financial perspective and say, okay, I need to invest in a better system, a 21st century system, and but I need a yield. So you're looking at a number that says, okay, you've worked the business case backwards rather than forwards and said, okay, I need to generate £100,000 worth of savings.
Yep.
But you don't know where the £100,000 is going to come from. So actually, are you reducing your dwell time in terms of, are you reducing the amount of time that it takes to get someone into the work that they do because they're having less time to prepare?
Yeah, that's exactly that. You know, that yield, increase the yield by 100,000, reduce it by 100,000. That's your outcome. But what's the problem? You know, what do you actually need to touch to get you to that figure? But that's just, you know, the nature of business. That's the way people work. But you've got to flip it on its head. To get to that, there's a series of problems you need to solve. Do we shut depots? Do we need to get better, capacity utilisation? You might go, we're running a fleet and it's 50% empty most of the time, so we're never going to get that yield. How do we close that gap?
Yeah.
You've got to have it might be one problem, it might be many to hit your outcome. But you've got to start with the problem and work your way through.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, we're getting to the end now. So in terms of, from my experience, I think something we haven't talked about, we talked about the human aspect of it, but if you can take the stress out of not a frontline manager and a second line manager's role, and allow them to think, spend more time talking to their people, spend more time talking to their customers, and making sure that consumers are satisfied. The power of that is, I wouldn't say it's totally intangible, but it's almost intangible because they've just got more time. And if the business is open-minded enough not to see a headcount reduction as a success rather than, okay, what are you enabling people to do? So what would, in 2 minutes, what would be your success story that you pull out and say, okay, there was an epiphany for these people in terms of, I didn't think that would be it, but that's what that investment has delivered.
Yeah, I think a big one was a client that we worked with last year. Again, as I sort of mentioned, setting their ways, but we've done it in a certain way because it worked for 20 years.
Yeah.
And then we've helped them sort of re-engineer the way their network works. They had a lot of overhead that I had to remember. It was in a spreadsheet. If the spreadsheet goes missing, we don't know what's going on. We've managed to digitise a lot of that and then help them simplify it. And then suddenly we've seen, the peak. At Christmas time, we increased, their average orders per hour. We took it up by 1.5, in comparison to their incumbent platform. All because we helped them make changes. And then we were getting the transport planners going, this is great. I can understand it at my fingertips, what's going on. And then I can make a change, and in near real time, I can see the impact of that change. We know if we've got it right, we know if we've got it wrong, and we can continue to react in a far quicker manner than we've ever been able to do. So they, in their mind, are giving a better offering to their customers because they're on the front foot. It's moved to being predictive rather than reactive. Because last thing you want is, my shopping's gone missing, or the van's broken down, I don't know where it is. It's allowing them to move to being on the front foot. It's at the end of the day, it enhances their swap offering and the proposition. And they're delighted for that. And it also makes the transport planners' jobs easier because they're now looking at other things inside the business as a result of getting more time. Yeah. And they're throwing new challenges at us. So they're asking, could you do this? Could you do that? It's giving new ideas that nobody's spoken about yet, which is quite exciting.
I think, in summary, you're not just investing in an optimisation program, but you're turbocharging the people that you want to stay in the business. You're enabling them to do more, do better things.
That's it in a nutshell.
Brilliant. Thank you very much
for
your time. Thank you.